Cuba played a major role in the development of the Cold War. The events that took place on the island left the world on the verge of a nuclear conflict. Let's take a quick look at Cuba. Cuba is an island in the Caribbean and lies 140 kilometers away from the US. In 1950, it had a population of 5.5 million people. After being discovered in 1492 by Columbus, it became a Spanish colony until 1898, when it was then ruled by the US. It achieved its independence in 1902 and developed into a fragile democracy. In 1952, with the secret support of the United States, Fulgencio Batista ran for the May elections, but took power 3 months before after launching a military coup, secretly backed by the CIA. Cuba became a banana republic governed by a puppet president. It's important to highlight that during the 1940s and 50s, American corporations ruled the Cuban economy. La Habana was a resort for the world's elite, and during Batista's rule, it resulted in a rise of prostitution, political corruption and organised crime. Unemployment started to rise and the average living conditions started to deteriorate. Batista's dictatorship was seriously under threat as figures such as Fidel Castro started to becoming increasingly popular.
Fidel Castro was a lawyer who graduated from Havana University and worked with legal issues concerning poor people, which made him aware of the inequalities that were present in Cuban society. In 1947, Castro joined the Cuban People's Party, who presented themselves to the 1952 elections as Batista's opponents, but never had the chance due to his military coup. In July 1953, Castro led a group of rebels to overtake the military base of Moncada, in order to spark the start of a revolution. The mission failed and the members of the group were exiled, but it gave them the chance to appeal to the Cuban population. This rebel army organized from Mexico returned to Cuba and initiated guerrilla warfare. Key figures such as Camilo Cienfuegos and the famous Che Guevara joined the conflict. During the next couple of years, the rebel army was popular but never possessed that extra edge to overtake Batista's regime. The overthrow came in January of 1959 when the guerrillas took control of the capital, La Habana.
After overthrowing Batista, Castro turned in a fairly friendly manner to the US, open to negotiate and establish relations for the good of his country. But the US rejected this offer, so Castro decided to reject the US. In February 1959, the government began to expropriate land and private property. By the end of 1960, more than $25 billion worth of assets had been nationalized. This event had an immense effect on the US. These events led to the attempted invasion of Cuba, known as the Bay of Pigs invasion.
In early 1961, a counter-revolutionary militia was funded and trained by the CIA. The military group was named Brigade 2506, which consisted of 1,400 American-trained Cuban refugees, and attempted to overthrow the revolutionary government that was showing signs of socialism. And on April 17th, they invaded Cuba. The invasion ended with the capture of 1,214 of the Cuban rebels. It was ultimately a huge failure due to many mistakes, the lack of air cover provided by the US, along with the great underestimation of the support that Castro had acquired, led to the defeat of Brigade 2506 in just 3 days. After the US denied to give Cuba economic aid and became increasingly friendly with the USSR. The failed invasion strengthened Castro's image and administration. The captured prisoners were exchanged for $53 million worth of goods. On May the 1st, Castro's regime openly proclaimed their intention to adapt socialism and continue their relations with the USSR. Ultimately, the Bay of Pigs was extremely humiliating for the US foreign policy, as they had failed against such a small country which was now allied with an enemy. After this humiliation, the USA launched the secret Operation Mongoose, also known as the Cuban Project, which had the objective, through the means of terrorism, to overthrow the communist regime in Cuba, burning sugarcane crops, the mining of harbors, and many attempts to assassinate Castro.
In May 1962, the Soviet Union loaded Cuba with 152 nuclear warheads. Khrushchev put missiles into Cuba as a strategic military movement to be able to attack the USA more accurately. To the international community, he justified his actions by claiming it was a way to protect Cuba. In reality, his actions were more of a counterattack due to the fact that the Americans kept missiles in Turkey, which presented a threat against the Soviet sphere of influence. On the 14th of October, an American U-2 spy plane took photos of those missiles. The following days, these images were processed and the beginning of the 13-day crisis started. So, how was this hasty conflict resolved? On day 1, October the 16th, President Kennedy is informed and convenes a group of advisors known as the Executive Committee, EXCOM. They debate the possible courses of action: do nothing, diplomatic pressure, secret approach to Castro, invasion, airstrike, or blockade. On day 3, the USSR lies to the US, saying Soviet assistance was solely for Cuba's defense. Meanwhile, 4 more missile sites are found. On day 6, October the 21st, the Allies are informed. The next day, Kennedy makes the event public, addressing the nation, and plans for a naval blockade are made.
Can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
On day 9, October the 24th, the quarantine on Cuba goes into effect. The following day brings confrontations at the UN between the US and the USSR, discussing the missiles. Day 12, also known as Black Saturday, the climax of the crisis. Khrushchev proposes to the US to remove missiles from Turkey. Soviet anti-aircraft weapons bring down an American U-2 pilot. Now, all missile sites are capable of attacking the US. The Air Force are ready to strike and Marines are ready to invade Cuba. The next day, October 28th, the final day of the 13 days, the Soviets capitulate. Khrushchev agrees to remove the such weapons which you describe as offensive, in return for assurance that the US will not invade Cuba. To analyse the conclusions, we must look at the objectives of each nation. For the Soviets, their target was revisionist. By developing missiles in Cuba, they would counterbalance the Americans and protect Castro's regime from invasion. For the Americans, the target was orthodox. They had to maintain strategic military and political superiority against the Soviets. For the Cubans, it was national security, through regime survival and military strengthening. But of course, the main target is one thing, and the means to achieve it is something different. The Americans considered themselves winners, as they managed to establish themselves superior than the Soviets. The Soviets considered it a victory, as they had prevented a future invasion of Cuba. As for Cuba, the Castro regime secured itself against American invasion. The survival of the Cuban revolutionary regime led many states in the Central and South America to see, like Castro, their own path to socialism, such as Nicaragua and Bolivia, who received Cuban support during their revolutions. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, the first diplomatic nuclear conflict, it was aware how easy the world could be destroyed. The superiority struggle between the two superpowers continued, and the production of nuclear weapons increased, bringing uncertain years ahead.